into your seats, folks. This is a doozy. Believe it or not, apparently behind the scenes, the Democratic Party, the Biden campaign in particular, have been testing out the possibility of Kamala Harris replacing Joe Biden. This was supposed to be private. It was supposed to be secret, but it is no longer secret because the cat has been let out of the bag by MSNBC. I don't know if they were supposed to reveal that or not, but it's out there. Now, I tell you that because more Democrats are coming forward to protest against Joe Biden staying in this race. And there's another one that was announced earlier today. This is Representative Levin is coming forward, and you're going to hear there is now, I think, over 20 Democrats that have decided to reject Joe Biden, continuing to stay in this race now. Let's dive in here and we'll get to Kamala. It'll all make sense.
The head count continues on Capitol Hill, where NBC Julie Sirkin is standing by. And I understand you have some new reporting, Julie.
Yeah, we do, Chris. Just literally in the last couple of minutes, the statement has not even gone out widely yet, but our team has learned that there is a 19th Democrat from Congress, 18th House Democrat, 19th overall, of course, including Senator Peter Welch. That is Congressman Mike Levin of California that has come out in the last couple of moments to call on the president to exit the race. I am just reading this in real time. He says, like many of you, I was naturally concerned about Biden's performance in the recent debate. Since then, he says he's made his opinions known in the appropriate manner with leadership, with his colleagues. As we learned, of course, Jeffries, the Democratic leader, just relayed some of those concerns to the president in their meeting last night. Levin continues to say here that he has deep respect for the president's 5+ decades of public service, but he believes the time has come for President Biden to pass the torch. He says it is time to move forward with a new leader together. This is somebody who is a frontline Democrat. He is part of the mission of Democrats in trying to retake the House, to try and flip those, to hang on to those seats rather in California, flipping those seats in New York to try and flip control of the House. So this is really crucial, Chris. And obviously it comes as we've seen a chorus and an avalanche of Democrats expressing their concerns. Again, 19 to come out publicly and say Biden should step out of the race. But there's a lot in the gray area who have been watching the president closely and all of his performances, privately concerned, publicly saying that perhaps Biden could still change his mind, opening that door a little bit, including members of leadership like Speaker Emerita Pelosi, who do have a caucus, including one that, of course, the president has spoken to in recent days that has stood behind the president. That is the Congressional Black Caucus, Chris. The membership there, the leader there, Congressman Horsford, have been very defensive of Biden. But in our new reporting today from my colleagues, there are some cracks even there. They want to see the president more defiant. They want to see him more aggressive. And like many.
And you hear that part? Even the Congressional Black Caucus, there's disagreements there.
Of their colleagues, they also share the mind that they do need to see a clear path to victory for the president that they have not been able to map out yet, Chris. So a lot of moving parts here, and certainly very notable that as the NATO summit concluded after that press conference yesterday as well, we are now up to 5 Democrats since then that have called on President Biden to exit the race here, especially as he is holding calls, Chris, with members of the Hispanic caucus, with members of the Asian Pacific American caucus, other caucuses that we're reporting throughout the day and tomorrow as well, to try and assuage some of those concerns.
So more Democrat politicians are coming forward to ask Joe Biden to step down or pass the torch. Doesn't necessarily say that they want Kamala, but they don't think that he should stay in this race. And you're also going to hear from Cori Bush. Cori Bush made a statement recently at a union event here in St. Louis. And I want you to hear what she said her constituents are saying to her about Joe Biden.
The people of St. Louis are still calling into our office, letting us know what they think, and we're still listening. So we are hearing from the community, but I will say right now, 100% of the phone calls into our office are asking me to ask the president to step out of the race. And so I'm making it clear, if you have an opinion on it, please call our office and let us know.
100% of the phone calls that are calling into her office, this is the St. Louis area, are asking Joe Biden to leave the race. Now, why is that important? Cori Bush lives in a pretty, if I remember correctly, her district it's very blue, but it's also, there's a lot of black people in her district and they don't want Joe. So that's not good for Joe Biden at all. Now, then there's more. We get into Kamala, we getting there. There's a little bit more here because apparently something else privately has been happening behind the scenes. And I'm just going to tell you, I told you so, because I hinted on it last night, but now CNN has confirmed it. Obama and Pelosi privately expressed concerns over Biden. There it is. What did I tell you last night? Nancy Pelosi in that interview, she was not willing to say that she supports Biden. AOC did. AOC unconditionally supported Joe Biden and said, stop this nonsense. He is our nominee. Nancy Pelosi said, let's just wait and see what happens. Right? This op-ed that appears out of nowhere from George Clooney, wink, wink. I told you yesterday, I think we all know that's really Barack Obama, and they've made George Clooney the face of it. And now you have this confirmation here that Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama behind the scenes are not wanting this to continue. Obama and Pelosi have spoken privately about Joe Biden and the future of his 2024 campaign. Both the former president and ex-speaker expressed concerns about how much harder they think it's becoming for the president to beat Donald Trump. Neither is quite sure what to do. So you know what? This is on the Democratic Party, because I seem to remember during the 2020 primary, Joe Biden not being number one in the polls, particularly during the debates. I seem to remember Joe Biden not winning early primary states until he got to South Carolina, because he got that endorsement from Jim Clyburn. And that changed everything. I seem to remember Obama making phone calls to get other candidates to drop out of the race to help Joe Biden. Joe Biden was never a strong candidate. I tried to tell people this from day one. They made him look strong by getting other candidates to withdraw, by that win that he had in South Carolina. And that's how he got that big boost. If those other candidates, if Buttigieg, if Beto, if Amy Klobuchar, if they would have stayed in that race, I don't think Joe Biden wins. I call it like I see it. They wanted Joe Biden to beat Bernie Sanders. One of the representatives admitted this the other night. He was not selected to beat Donald Trump. He was selected to beat Bernie Sanders. Well, you got what you wished for. You got it. And now you have this guy who was already showing signs of decline during the primary debates in 2020, who is now worse off now, is continuing to decline, and it's not going to get better. I'll be very clear about that. Now you're stuck with that guy. Then you had other candidates who wanted to primary challenge Joe Biden. The DNC was completely against it. So they said, we're not going to have a primary. So this is what you got. This is what you asked for. That's what you got. So karma can be a pain in the ass. Democrats are desperate for the dispiriting infighting to end so they can get back to trying to beat the former president. And they're begging either Obama or Pelosi to help them get there, aware that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer doesn't have the trust of Biden, and that the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries doesn't have the depth of relationship to deliver the message. CNN spoke with more than a dozen members of Congress, operatives, and multiple people in touch with both Obama and Pelosi, many of whom say that the end for Biden's candidacy feels clear. And at this point, it's just a matter of how it plays out, even after Thursday night's news conference. So again, if you're just joining, it has now been revealed that Obama and Pelosi privately expressed concerns over Biden. So, as I've been saying, again, if Obama not behind you, you know. So, I believed that Barack Obama behind the scenes was expressing this concern. And that is why so many Democrats in the House right now feel emboldened to come forward and say that I am not going to support Joe Biden continuing in this race. I wouldn't even be surprised if Obama didn't put them up to it, to put that pressure on Joe Biden to get him to rethink this and to pass the torch. Now, they have been testing Kamala Harris. Behind the scenes, the Biden campaign are testing this out to see, does she have a better possibility to beat Donald Trump, or does he have a better possibility to beat Donald Trump? Let's get into this. What a doozy.
What the reporting is, it involves the Biden campaign, and they are assessing the viability of a candidacy by the vice president. Let me bring in Monica Alba. Monica, what can you tell us about how they're looking at Kamala Harris and why?
Well, NBC News is confirming this was first reported by the New York Times, Chris. But what's significant here is that I'm told by a source that's familiar with this testing that is going on this week that this is being done in the context of trying to assess how she would fare against the presumptive Republican nominee as a direct result of what we have seen Donald Trump do in the last couple of days, which is to step up his attacks against her specifically, given there are questions about whether Joe Biden will still be the Democratic nominee in November. He insists that he will, but of course we know, as you were just discussing, because of this pressure from other Democrats and lawmakers, that there could be a change here if the president decides to step aside. So the Biden campaign is doing this. I understand that this is being commissioned by the Biden campaign's own analytics team. And importantly, and what we should point out here, and what a Democratic operative told us, is that essentially this is something you would be doing if you're trying to give a message to President Biden to sort of test how the vice president would do and whether she may fare better, worse, or the same as he is doing in the current polling, that this would be a data point that you could maybe show to the president as he, in the weeks ahead, could potentially have difficult conversations about his candidacy. Again, the Biden campaign is saying that he is full steam ahead. That is what they're certainly insisting publicly. But I think this is a concession that there are larger conversations going on about if there would be a change at the top of the ticket, and that the natural person, as we've been talking about the mechanisms for how this would work, would be Vice President Kamala Harris. So that is the next sort of part of this story in terms of how she would do. And there has been some polling out there already where they've been trying to sort of test how she would do against Donald Trump. But obviously the Biden team, for their own interests, wants to have their own assessment. And that is why they're going to be continuing with that polling. It sounds like at least this week, and then we'll see what the actual results of that. But we should also point out, Chris, that according to a memo that we obtained today, the Biden campaign and senior advisors are saying that, yes, they're acknowledging there has been real movement in what we've seen in the polls, certainly in those battleground states since the disastrous debate performance 2 weeks ago. But they're insisting that it doesn't amount to a sea change in the state of the race. And so, again, they are trying to argue that Joe Biden is still their candidate, still the nominee, still the person that they're going to go on this journey with. But it is notable that they are zooming out and taking this larger picture should that change.
Okay, to this point here from William, how did the Dems let it get to this point? Because the Democratic Party is reactive and not proactive. They have been bad at this for quite a long time. And I've said it over and over again that they don't try to get ahead of the curve. They like to sit back and just watch and see what happens. And then when shit hits the fan, then they try to say, okay, let's jump in and let's try to do something about it. They've been that way as long as I can remember. If you look at what happened with Roe v. Wade, that was the Democratic Party being reactive instead of proactive. When they had Democrat presidents that were leading at that point, they chose not to codify Roe v. Wade. Barack Obama said it would be the first thing that he did when he was elected. He got elected and said, no, we can't do it because of Lieberman. They could have ended the filibuster. That was an excuse. So they dragged that on for as long as they could. And that's how you ended up with your overturn of Roe v. Wade. That's how that happened. Now, we're going to look at this poll because I want to show you something. So one of the polls that's out now, it's an ABC Ipsos poll. And it shows Biden against Trump. It says Trump 47%, Biden 46%. When they add Kamala Harris to the equation, it's Kamala Harris 49% and Trump 46%. Now, I am going to say this before people freak out, because I know a lot of people are going to see that and be like, there's no freaking way. What you need to remember when you see this poll is that is the national popular poll. So that's the popular vote. That's not what elects the president. Hillary was beating Donald Trump in the polls too, remember? It's the Electoral College that elects the president of the United States. So that's just a national popular poll. This comes down to those swing states, which I continue to remind people, because I think people sometimes forget. But as we get closer to the election, you're going to see this more and more. It's going to come down to those swing states. So I have not seen a poll yet that shows Kamala Harris and Donald Trump up against each other in the swing states. So that I have not seen yet. But people have to remember again, because I can already see it happening. You have to remember that Hillary Clinton was, I think, especially at this point, she was still ahead of Donald Trump in the national poll, the popular poll. Unfortunately for her, Hillary Clinton didn't know how to work the Electoral College. So she lost the Electoral College, but she won the popular vote. It could be that Kamala, although I still doubt this, but it could be that Kamala or Biden could win a popular vote, but that doesn't mean that they're going to win the Electoral College, especially if they struggle in those swing states, which is where Biden is struggling right now. We're going to get to this panel here on MSNBC. They're talking about this as well. How would Kamala Harris fare against Donald Trump instead of Biden?
As President Joe Biden convenes world leaders this week for the NATO summit, Vice President Kamala Harris has been on the campaign trail, continuing to vigorously prosecute the case against Donald Trump, highlighting the stakes of this election in terms of whether or not we remain a democracy. Vice President Harris's campaign tour comes amid growing angst and chatter, even within the Biden campaign and allies themselves, about whether or not the vice president might be better equipped to prevail in November after President Joe Biden's performance in the first debate. New York Times out this afternoon with this reporting, quote, President Biden's campaign is quietly testing the strength of Vice President Kamala Harris against former President Trump in a head-to-head survey of voters. The survey, which is being conducted this week and was commissioned by the Biden campaign's analytics team, is believed to be the first time since the debate that Mr. Biden's aides have sought to measure how the vice president would fare at the top of the ticket. The results of that survey could determine whether Joe Biden remains at the top of the ticket. New York Times also reporting that a key group of advisors to the president believe that the strength of the vice president might sway his decision to stay in this race. Quote, a small group of Mr. Biden's advisors in the administration and the campaign have said they would have to convince the president of several things. They said they would have to make the case to the president, who remains convinced of the strength of his campaign, that he cannot win against former President Donald Trump. They have to persuade him to believe that another candidate, like Vice President Kamala Harris, could beat Mr. Trump. And they have to assure Mr. Biden that should he step aside, the process to choose another candidate would be orderly and not devolve into chaos in the Democratic Party.
And the way that they're going to try to do that is through the polling. So that's why they're conducting these polls privately. Someone mentioned this in the chat already. This is hilarious. Hanging with Dr. Sari. I got a text today of a survey if I would support Kamala. So there you go. You see, guys, they're already doing it.
In a statement to the New York Times, the White House denied that there was an effort by members of President Biden's team to convince President Biden to exit the race. Joining our coverage, New York Times investigative reporter Mike Schmidt. His byline is on that New York Times reporting about what the president's advisors are discussing behind the scenes. And the president of the Reproductive Freedom for All, folks that we turn to all the time on all matters, is here for this. Mini Timaraju. Mike Schmidt, take me through what you and your colleagues are reporting in the story about the advisors, as well as the story about the president's own political operatives testing Vice President Harris head to head with Trump.
Well, what we're reporting is that there's a realization amongst some of these longtime Biden aides that he's going to have to exit the race, and that the biggest obstacle to that will be having to convince him to do that. And the story really encapsulates what the story of the moment is, which is essentially a standoff between Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party that is around the edges saying some things, but at the top of the party is not coming out and publicly forcefully asking him to get off the ticket, and the president sort of digging his heels in even further. We report in the story that the president had said before the debate that he thought he had a far better chance of beating Trump than the vice president. This is a conviction that he has maintained in the aftermath of the debate. And different from him, there's a realization amongst some aides that his candidacy is not going to work, that it is too far of an uphill battle, that he needs to step aside, and that they have to figure out a way to get him there and to convince him to do that.
Yeah. This is definitely an embarrassing moment, I think, for the Democratic Party, because and I'm pretty sure Barack Obama is probably like, my legacy. Because I know he said that when Hillary Clinton lost, he was like, my legacy. Vain, aren't they? But it's an embarrassing moment for the Democratic Party. But I also want to show you something else, too. Now, this is coming from CNN here, and they're talking about the Google searches. Now, some people, I think they saw this and they thought, oh, this is a good thing for Joe Biden. But they go on to explain to you why this actually is not a good thing. Listen to this. Run the numbers, post-debate focus now on Biden's candidacy. They're going to talk about this, that Biden led Trump in Google searches, but is that necessarily a good thing? Listen to this.
These are Google searches, all right? The days that Biden led Trump in Google searches this year in 2024. Pre-debate, Biden led Trump, get this, on just 1% of days. The election, for all intents and purposes, really was about Donald Trump, not Joe Biden, despite the fact that Joe Biden, of course, is the incumbent. A very unusual situation. But look at what's happened post-debate. Days in which Joe Biden has led Donald Trump in Google searches. 87% of the days. It's been all but 2 days since the debate in which Joe Biden has led Donald Trump in Google searches. There were only 2 days prior in the entire year in which Joe Biden led Donald Trump in Google searches. That is completely flipped on its head post-debate. This election, for all intents and purposes, has turned into one that is about Joe Biden and not about Donald Trump.
Could that be a good thing, or is this negative?
No. If that head shake doesn't give it away. This,
sometimes, you're Googling and you're not, it's not bad.
You do not want this election to be about Joe Biden if you are Joe Biden, because take a look here. The view of the candidates. Look at this. Negative rating for Joe Biden, 57%. 57% of Americans have a negative view about Joe Biden. You want this to be about Donald Trump because it's not like Donald Trump is beloved by the American public. 54% of Americans have a negative opinion about Donald Trump.
Let me pause here for a second. This is what CNN doesn't understand and gets wrong, or maybe they do understand, but they don't want to say it. When he said it's not like Donald Trump is beloved by the American Republic, apparently he was beloved by enough Americans to win. Apparently he's beloved by enough Americans for this race to be as close as it is. This is where what they get wrong. They still don't get it. It's just like, I don't know how else to say this, but it's just, there are still a lot of people that are Trump fans and Trump supporters. Do I see the Trump support as bold and as popular as it was in 2016? No, I don't. This time around, I don't see it as popular as it was in 2016, but don't get it twisted. There are still many diehard Trump supporters. And then also there are new Trump supporters. That's another thing. People that are so upset with Joe Biden about the economy that they want Donald Trump back because they're saying the economy was better under him than it was under Joe Biden. But the point of this conversation is that just because people are Googling you, that doesn't mean that it's good for you. Sometimes people are Googling because it's bad. The Googling could have been something like, does Joe Biden have Parkinson's? Does Joe Biden have dementia? It could be those types of Google searches. Let's go back here. My mouse's pad is sticking.
But again, if this election is about Joe Biden, this turns into a major issue for him, because I want to take you through a little bit of history, Sarah. A little bit of a history lesson at this particular hour. Take a look here. Presidents with a 50% disapproval rating at this point in their presidency. Jimmy Carter, George H.W. Bush, Donald Trump in 2020, and now Joe Biden in 2024. What do these three gentlemen have in common? Trump, Bush, and Carter? All of them. They all lost. They all lost the election. So the fact is, Joe Biden at this point does not want to be part of this group. He wants the attention to turn back to Donald Trump, because in all honesty, Sarah, I believe that's really the only way he can win, because if it's a referendum about him, this contest is over.
And that's why they are testing out Kamala Harris, because the numbers, they saw the polling, they knew what was really going on. But again, I have to say this, folks, I'm sorry once again, but the reality is this is the fault of the Democratic Party for not allowing to have a primary process when there were primary candidates. There was Marianne Williamson, Dean Phillips, RFK Jr. was originally running as a Democrat. Remember, they wouldn't give them a fair shake, and that's why he split off and decided to run as an independent. So on a number of issues, if you look back at this is the Democratic Party's fault, because they were not willing to have a serious primary, and now they're stuck with what they got. And then the reality is it's July. November is just around the corner. So if you are going to replace Joe Biden, you don't have that long to do it. And then you have to have that person has to also win over the American public. So it's just very sloppy and messy. It's all over the damn place. And then you have people like Simone Sanders, who, again, I point fingers at her too. Miss Simone Sanders is sitting here and she's going to tell you there was a primary process. We're going to debunk this in real time.
As my former boss, Bernie Sanders, would say, of two things. First, the process, right? It is not the electeds and the party leaders that pick their representatives. The people pick the representatives. And so the process is not that the people, that the elected leadership, this small group, should be picking who the Democratic nominee is, first and foremost. The people picked, and they picked Joe Biden. Now, people can have qualms about the primary process and say they didn't feel like it was open. Well, boo, it was a primary process, okay? We can't say that the primaries weren't had and ballots weren't cast.
My progressive friends who would like to live in a fantasy land, they need to come back to reality. Yeah. And the reality is this: the sitting president of the United States of America is a Democrat that would like to run for re-election, so much so that he has declared a re-election campaign. Right. In that case, the Democratic National Committee will not facilitate a primary process. There will be no debate stage for Bobby Kennedy, Marianne Williamson, or anyone else to stand on.
So we're going to have another Bobby Kennedy in an empty chair in a debate, right?
There will be no debate.
Yeah, no debate.
The Democratic National Committee administers the debates, and they're not going to set up a primary process for debates for someone to challenge the head of the Democratic Party.
That was May 5th, 2023. Never forget that. So Simone Sanders is paid to lie. You have to understand that. So she told you in 2023 that the DNC is not going to set up a debate process against an incumbent president. So now she's saying that a handful of people don't decide who the person's going to be. Yes, a handful of people do decide who the nominee is going to be. They've been doing this. We watched them do this in 2020. Don't forget about the DNC fraud lawsuit that Bernie Sanders, peeps got together. I interviewed the lawyers, Jared Beck and his wife, on this channel last year. And they explained to me what happened in court and what the court said. The judge ruled that because the DNC is a corporation, they can select the candidates. They can select the nominee. And there's nothing you can do about it because it is a private corporation. I don't think Jared and Elizabeth Beck are doing interviews anymore, because when they came on the show last year, they said that like they put their all into that case. And all they wanted to do, they weren't trying to get things overturned so that Bernie would be the nominee. They wanted to get the grassroots money back to the people who gave that money to Bernie, the people who really did not have that money to give. A lot of working class people, a lot of poor people, they wanted those people to get their money back. And the federal judge ruled that. Look up Bruce Spiva. He was the attorney for the DNC. This is why they've always been able to win and have it their way, because, again, Simone Sanders is lying. So the shout out to Case Study QB for that clip, for that flashback there to show people what she said prior. The DNC did not want a primary debate, so this is what they're stuck with. Dean Phillips was the only one who was willing to publicly admit right out of the gate that he was running for president against Joe Biden because he believed Joe Biden was too old. He was very honest about it. Now, I don't support the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. I got burned after Bernie and the squad. So I learned my lesson. But the reality is, if they're testing Kamala, that is not good for Biden. And I don't think that Kamala can beat Trump either. Do you guys think that Kamala can beat Trump? I don't. Kamala, when she was running for president in 2020, remember, she couldn't even get a delegate in California. That's her home state. At one point, she was at the top of the polls. Everybody remember this? And they were trying to really push her. And you see how that slid down rather quickly. But I don't think she can beat Donald Trump either. I don't care what that Ipsos poll says. I'm listening to people on the ground. I'm talking to people in the streets. And that is not what they are telling me. It's a hot mess, but they put themselves in this mess. So karma's a bitch, but you guys did it. Let's see that poll, fam. Do you think Kamala should replace Joe Biden? What? Okay, should Kamala replace Joe Biden? We have 1,837 votes. 15% said yes. 27% said no. 47% said I'm voting third party. And 12% said, girl, I have no idea.